I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia and Young Harris College. Our guest is former Georgia State Senator and current Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. Welcome, Governor.
Well, thank you, Bob. Good to be with you.
Well, I want to point this out because I think this is useful knowledge. Protocol requires me to refer to you as governor.
Right.
Unless you're in the presence of the governor.
That's right.
So the governor's not here. So, Governor, let's start about talking about your early life in Gainesville, Georgia.
Early life, in Gainesville, Georgia. Actually, I'm a seventh generation Hall County, believe it or not. It's kind of fascinating. Our family has been there for a long, long time. Most people, when they hear the name Cagle, they think of poultry, and as I commonly refer to them, unfortunately, I didn't get the benefit of having the poultry money, not part of that family, but our family's been there a long time. Agricultural background in terms of our roots. Hall County has changed quite a bit since I was obviously a youngster. It's grown and relatively large city now. But I grew up, really in a very humble beginnings. A great family on both sides of my mom and my dad's side. But my dad left when I was 3 years old, and so my mom had to raise me by herself. And I often refer to those days because it taught me some valuable lessons. And really for me, she had to make a lot of sacrifices. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. She never took a dime of public assistance, but she instilled in me those values of really hard work and perseverance and love for God. And what she taught me is that life was not about self, but life was about service and service to others. And when we commit ourselves to that act of service, that's when we truly find the greatness this world has to offer. And I think all of us have had people that have made sacrifices for us, and it's up to us to to pay that forward and to continue. And so those earlier days, they were tough. I mean, they were very, very tough, and there were a lot of struggles. But through that, it really helped shape and make me who I am today. And so I'm grateful for my mom, who's still alive and who's still doing quite well, and the sacrifices that she made, and the ability that she allowed me to be at a place where I am today. So
they tell me you were quite an athlete.
Well, I was a traditional guy growing up. Loved football, baseball, basketball. The traditional things, and was really lived for sports. I mean, that was something that I loved and really was motivated by. Played in high school, and then was recruited by Irk Russell to play at Georgia Southern. And I love telling this story because Irk Russell's just such a legend, and most of us remember him on the sidelines at the University of Georgia, butting heads, with players. And he was just a great motivator and a real legend, a real icon. And I'd been recruited from other colleges, but I really did want to go to Southern. And I was actually at home one day, and the phone rang, and it was Irk Russell. He says, "Casey?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "This is Irk Russell." And I said, "Hey, Coach." And he said, "I got one question for you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Are you going to come play for me?" And that was all it took, And so the rest was history. But through my early childhood, being involved in sports, I guess it kept me out of trouble. It was one of those things that kept me focused and motivated, and we were able to excel. I was recruited as a defensive back, and in high school, I was kind of a strong safety or outside linebacker, and I loved to hit people. Had decent speed, but not the kind of speed that was needed to play the position that they had recruited me for, which was cornerback. And I had about 4.5, 4.6 speed. You need about 4.3 speed to be a cornerback there at that league. But great memories, a lot of fun. Tore my Achilles tendon and could have come back, but pretty much decided that that was going to be the end of my football career.
Then you went back to Gainesville.
Went back to Gainesville at that point, and then went to Gainesville College. Was working at a place called Northeast Georgia Racquetball Club, and I was a Nautilus instructor, so teaching people how to exercise with the Nautilus equipment and weights and things, and it was really interesting because I was doing that after school, and it was a great environment. And the guy that I had always rented my tuxedos from back when I was in high school for prom actually was a member there, and came in one day, and he said, "I'm looking for somebody to manage my tuxedo store." And I said, "Well," I said, "Okay, good." I said, "What kind of person are you looking for?" And he said, "Someone just like you." And so I said, "Well, maybe we should have lunch." And so sure enough, we had lunch, and one thing led to another, and I had the opportunity to go and manage the store. And then really in probably about eight months later, I had the opportunity to buy it. And he was gracious enough to do some owner financing. And that was really my first entree into the business world, and the business arena was through a tuxedo store. So,
but you later got into banking.
Yeah, when I was in the retail business, was able to expand it, and then my mom and my stepfather came into the business as well, early on in that process, and then a guy by the name of James Mills, who was a good buddy of mine from high school. He said it to me one day. He said, "I want to run for the state house." And I said, "Well," that sounds like a good idea." And he said, "Yeah." And he says, "I want you to manage my campaign." I said, "James, I don't know anything about managing a campaign." And he says, "Well, I don't know anything about it either." He said, "But we'll learn together." So I agreed to do it. And it was really an interesting process. Met with him every Monday, and I'm getting to the banking part in a moment, but met with him every Monday. We would strategize on how to win this campaign and the things that needed to be done. And long story short, the campaign got nasty. It got real ugly, and we ended up winning the race. James did, and I went home to my wife and I said, "Honey, I'm never going to get in politics." I said, "This is the dirtiest thing I've ever been involved in." And so about less than a year, some folks approached me and said, "You need to run for the state senate." And this was back in 1993. And so I ran and was elected in 94 and took office in 95. Mm-hmm. And during that process, I actually got involved in real estate, and I started acquiring income producing properties. And then in 1998, I started a bank called Southern Heritage, and we built it up to about $160 million business, and then we rolled it into Gainesville Bank and Trust, and then built that to about a $2 billion holding company, and then ultimately sold out to SunTrust. But those were great memories back then, helping James out, and then obviously running for the state senate and being involved in business.
Well, there are several developments in your political career that we'd like to talk to you about. Of course, your election to the Senate, then your campaign for lieutenant governor, then your announcing for governor, and then your withdrawal from that race and running again for lieutenant governor. Yeah. So you've had a full political career. So let's go back to your first race. Yeah. That was for the state senate in 1994. You ran against a strong, well-respected, as I recall, Democratic woman.
That's right.
who was the incumbent, and
Yeah,
you won the race.
yeah.
Let me ask you about politics.
Sure.
Have you always been a Republican?
You know, I've got a great story for you, Bob, and you'll appreciate this. Back when I was deciding to run for the state senate, as you said, I was taking on an incumbent, well-financed, had an enormous amount of support, former county commissioner, very popular. And I went to my grandfather, who's now deceased, and was a great mentor, a wonderful man, and not real politically active, but very attuned to politics. And I went to him and I called him Papa Bill, and I said, Papa Bill, I said, I got some good news and bad news for you today. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, well, the good news is I've made a decision that I'm going to run for the state senate. And he perked up and he says, oh, that's good, that's good. And he paused for a moment. He says, well, what's the bad news? And I said, well, the bad news for you is that I'm running as a Republican. And he got this look on his face and he says, I've never voted for a Republican. And he ended it at that. And I never know, even to this day, I suspect he probably did, but he never revealed to me that he had voted for me. But in that day and time, you're right. I mean, Democrats had a very strong hold. And I, I was a Republican and never ran for office for anything other than on the Republican ticket. And we were successful in that race. We won by a pretty big margin at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But I was the first Republican elected to the state senate there in Hall County, which is kind of a remarkable thought in this day and time. But the thing about my grandfather, who was a staunch Democrat, he was the most conservative guy I knew. I mean, he was more conservative than a lot of Republicans are. Mm-hmm. And but it was, it was a generation, and we've seen a lot change over this time.
So you came to the Senate when there were very few Republicans.
Very much in the minority. There were, I want to say about 23, I think, Republicans out of 56 at that time, and so it was. For me, that was a positive, and I say it was a positive in this light because I got to learn from some phenomenally great individuals. People like Hugh Gillis, a state senator, an individual who was rooted in character and integrity, who appreciated the fact that his word was his bond, and you knew that he was dealing with you in good faith. And I could name so many individuals. Pierre Howard, who was the lieutenant governor then, was a very gracious man to me, was really served as a wonderful mentor, and was one of those that would reach across the party line and work with other individuals. And he took me under his wing, and when I needed something, I'd go to him and say, this is important to my district. And he would be there to help. And I tell the story because one of the big issues for me when I ran was what's called ESPLOS. It's the Educational Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. And I was real gung-ho about getting it passed because I campaigned on that. And it was interesting because I'm in the minority, okay, and not in the majority party. I was young, new, 28 years old, and people looked at me pretty much like, what's this guy trying to do, changing our tax policy. And I was gung-ho, and so I was eager to make it happen. And I'd have opposition. I'd get the opposition in a room. We'd get around a table. We'd solve it. And I finally got the bill all right, all prepared and ready. And a Democrat ended up stealing my bill and introducing it and rushing it through his committee. And his bill was coming to the floor before mine. And I was furious. And I went to Governor Howard at the time. And I said, this isn't right. And he says, Casey, you know what? You're right. It's not right. And he says, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to have you two senators reintroduce the bill. Y'all are going to co-author the bill, and we're going to pass it that way. Now, when I think back on that moment and that time, he could have said, "You're new at this process," and patted me on the back and sent me on my way. But what he really did is he said, "You have purpose and you have meaning, and you're elected by your constituency. And even if I'm in a different party, okay, you still are the voice for the people that you represent." And that's an important process. And it taught me that great lesson that we need to work together. And we don't, it doesn't mean that I compromise my convictions. It just simply means that we find common ground to move forward on, regardless of what party you may come from. And there are far greater things that we agree on than we disagree. And so, but oftentimes all you read about and all you see are the things that we disagree on. And so Pierre Howard taught me a valuable lesson. And so we talk about me coming in the minority. I was able to really learn from just some of the greats. I mean, Don Cheeks, and senator from Augusta, who was the banking committee chairman, and a phenomenal individual, a lot of fight. Paul Brown out of Athens, a great senator and on up in his years. Jim Tysinger. I mean, the list just goes on and on of individuals that really did help make me understand the process and understand the tradition of the Senate and what it means to be a state senator, and the value that and the opportunity that you have to make a difference for our citizens.
Besides education, you had another main agenda item, and that was transportation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, back when I was in the Senate, fortunately we were able to take the majority, and I was able to be the chair of the Finance Committee as a senator, and deeply involved in educational issues, but tax policy as well. And then when I was elected lieutenant governor, I really wanted to sat behind that desk and I said, I want this time to mean something. I want it to really matter. And I want to make sure that when I'm done, whenever that may be, that we've left something behind that can be positive, and that we can look to and say that we are able to influence public policy that impact people's lives in a great way. And education was one of those areas that I really focused on. And it was mainly because unfortunately, we haven't made great strides in education, and I really felt like I'd seen all the governors come and go, and they'd done some great things, but we never really got to the core issue of education. We always had this top-down style of management. We never really turned it upside down to really empower local people to make great decisions that impact education. And we have a 21st century economy that we have an educational system that's built on a 1960s model, and the two aren't working hand in hand. And so we needed to make change. And so I came up with two policy shifts for our state, and it's called the charter school system, where the entire system is able to convert to really what I call a contractual agreement with the state of Georgia, where they outline what their objectives are, what their goals, their strategy, and they're able to really design an educational curriculum that meets the need of not only their community, but meets the need of the individual student. Because not every kid learns at the same pace or in the same manner. And what works in Savannah may not work in Gainesville, or what works in Albany may not work in Augusta. So what we needed was real local control and the accountability measures to be in place. And through a contractual agreement, you can achieve both of those. And we've been able to do that and have great success and demonstrate not only a wonderful model for the state of Georgia, but I think nationally. The second thing was to really initially address the dropout rate. I mean, our dropout rate is dismal in our state. And the number one reason that kids drop out of school is because they don't see the relevance in what they're learning. I mean, they don't see how it meets the practical application in the world. And what I wanted to do is create this model that really did give, or really would give individual students relevance in the classroom. So we call it the College and Career Academy network that we created, and today it's thriving and it's been very successful, and it's a wonderful way to not only keep kids in school, but the beauty is we've got a 98% graduation rate with these students in these college and career academies, 100% placement rate when they're done, because when they graduate, they're graduating with an industry certified certificate that prepares them for the workplace, or they're being dually enrolled in a community college and they're coming out. Some of them, I just got through doing a graduation not long ago where the student graduated from high school on Friday and then graduated with their associate's degree on Saturday. That's the reality of what we can do. And it focuses and motivates kids like they've never been focused before. And so I'm real excited about our college and career academies. By 2020, we want to have every student access to these college and career academies, and we want to see more and more of our schools become contract schools or charter school systems where they really are focused and have the reins and have this entrepreneurial spirit to where they can design an educational system that really is a 21st century, innovative and focused on what kids need today.
Let's talk about transportation.
Sure, yeah. You know, transportation is one of those areas where it is really, to some degree, a great Achilles heel for us in Georgia, particularly in metro Atlanta. I mean, we have a lot of gridlock, and it's not only costing us time, but it's costing us money, and it's costing us jobs as well. And we've got to solve it, and it ultimately means that we're going to have to build more infrastructure, but we've also got to utilize the infrastructure that we have in a more efficient way, because it's difficult to buy more right of way. I mean, a lot of areas in Atlanta have already been developed. And when I drive in from Gainesville to Atlanta here every day, you look at the gridlock coming southbound. But if you look across that median on the north side, there's a lot of capacity. But now if you go to other states, they do what's called reversible lanes. On the other side, they let you, where the need is, they let you get in one or two additional lanes over there. And so it's utilizing that asset in the most efficient means. That's what we've got to be focused on here in Georgia, is making sure that we're getting the optimal amount of usage out of the asset that exists. And everything should be measured on a return on investment. And we don't need to have our citizens sitting in gridlock when we've got capacity on the other side. And so we've got to do that. We're going to have to build more toll roads. The motor fuel tax continues to decline, and we believe that it will continue as more and more people are not only shifting to more energy efficient vehicles, but utilizing public transit and other things of that nature. So we're going to have to utilize an alternative source of revenue, tolls, some type of user fee. And as long as the state can demonstrate that there's a value proposition to the consumer, to our citizens, I think it can be embraced in a very positive way. But logistics for Georgia, roads and rail is very critical. The port in Savannah, I mean, it's a huge success story. It's a huge economic engine for our state. Those goods have to be transported through our state, and a lot of them are being transported by rail. But because of the great interstate system that we have, it's very advantageous for businesses to be able to utilize our Savannah port. We're talking about $60 billion worth of annual revenue, an economic impact that is huge for every piece of the state. And transportation and logistics will continue to have to be a huge priority for the state of Georgia as we grow and we continue to be really the capital of the South. And there's no question that we are. And then you look not only at the seaport, but you also look at freight in the context of our airport. The busiest airport in the world is right here. It's a huge economic engine, a huge asset that's helped us be what we are.
Let's talk a minute about financing road building. We had an election which I referred to as T-SPLOST,
Right.
which was a special option sales tax
Correct.
for transportation in various regions of the state.
Correct.
What was your outlook on that?
Well, I think that it was there are a couple of things, when we look back on it. Timing was a big part of it. It was probably the wrong time. We were going through a really difficult economic cycle, and people really were not secure. They didn't feel secure in their jobs. We had devaluation in real estate like we've never seen before, and so it was difficult to ask the voters to give another penny. And so I think that was one aspect. The other aspect that was difficult is they created predetermined regions, and those predetermined regions were set up, and if the region voted for it, and one county voted against it, that county, even though they voted against it, were still bound by what the region determined, and that caused a lot of concern. The other area of concern was the issue of transit and funding going to a public transit system that a lot of people don't have confidence in. And so what was created was the perfect storm that really derailed I think a plan that might make a lot of sense, particularly for the metro area. It did pass in some of the rural areas, and it's not to say that it's not something that may not be revisited in years to come. But we certainly have to look for alternative funding in terms of transportation, and that is one approach that was rejected by the voters, but may have another opportunity.
Well, after 5 terms in the state Senate, you decided to run for lieutenant governor.
Right.
As I recall, it was a pretty exciting campaign.
Yeah, it was.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, it was, Bob. It was exciting. I made the decision to run for lieutenant governor after being in the Senate for 12 years, and it was not an easy decision to make because obviously going from a state Senate race to the entire state is a pretty big undertaking. But I knew that it was the right thing for me to do, and so once I made my mind up that this was the path that we were going to chart, I had a visit by an individual who was pretty well known, not only in the state of Georgia but around the U.S., and his name was Ralph Reed. He was the Christian Coalition, and he came by and said, "I'm going to run for the lieutenant governor," and I said, "Well, appreciate you telling me about that." And, we decided that obviously we had a real race on our hands because this was a guy who was on the cover of Time magazine, and his name ID was far greater than mine. But I've always been one that loves a challenge. I love to be in a position to really fight for the things that you believe in, and I felt very strongly that being in the Senate, understanding the role of the lieutenant governor and the opportunity you have on this platform to do good things, and so I made the decision that we were going to run. So we were squared off with him. He came out of the gate while I was still in session, and probably had about $1.5 million advantage over me in fundraising before I could even begin raising money. It was one of those races that probably got more national coverage than we've seen in our state in some time. And I tell a funny little story, Bob, that I would go to places, and I remember being down in LaGrange, and a guy comes up and introduces himself and he says, "I'd like to interview you." And I said, "Well, sure, that'd be great. Where are you from?" And he said, well, Rolling Stones magazine. I thought, Rolling Stones magazine? Maybe I'm going to get on the cover of Rolling Stones, and I'll let Ralph Reed be on the cover of Time. You know, I'll take Rolling Stones any day of the week. So, but you know, it was a national, one that had a lot of national appeal. But we were successful in winning that race in the end, and I think that you know, we were able to really build upon our relationships, and we worked very, very, very hard in the campaign, and had a good team, and it was a great win. And as a result, you know, we were actually ended up being the first Republican lieutenant governor in the history of Georgia as well. So
that's history. Let's talk a minute about the office. The office was created as I recall, in the Georgia Constitution.
That's right.
Years ago, and its purpose is twofold. First of all, to succeed the governor in case of emergency, death, dismemberment, whatever, and secondly, to preside over the Senate.
That's right.
So tell us how you go about organizing the state Senate as an incumbent lieutenant governor and a new party.
Right. Yeah, you know, it's the lieutenant governor here in Georgia, and if you look around the nation, there are not a lot of lieutenant governors that are independently elected, okay, like we are, because a lot of them run on the same ticket, and many of them actually, some lieutenant governors have no power in the state Senate, and actually some don't even preside. So we are unique in that we are independently elected, and by the Constitution, I am the president of the Senate. And in the event the governor chose to give me executive powers, which no governor has, you know, we would be able to accept those. So you do kind of straddle a fence to some degree, but I think that it's the right balance. And you know, you organize, I think, no different than anyone in business does. I mean, you try to put together a good team around you, individuals that you know, are sincere and genuine about service to the state, and those that, you know, want to, you know, advance good public policy issues and that are bright. And we've been able to do that. We've had some power struggles, you know, and there's those are things that I think are just normal in this business. It's unfortunate, but there are those that, you know, might want to interpret a different constitution, you know, and so, but for us, it's you know, you've got to have a leader in any organization, and in the Senate, it's the lieutenant governor. In the House, it's the speaker, and you get things done by working together and by building a coalition of good, like-minded individuals. And so we've been able to have that success. I've appointed probably more Democrat chairs of committees than any other lieutenant governor. I also have a committee on assignments, so there's a sharing of the process to build a bigger tent and more unity among the Senate itself. And I also, when it comes to conference committees, I appoint many Democrats to that in order for the minority party to have their voice heard in major issues. So it's you know, it's understanding that this Senate and this body and this chamber is far bigger than any one person. You know, it's kind of like that bucket of water. You know, you put your finger in it, but the minute you take your finger out, all of a sudden it fills back up. And you know, all of us are really only here for a short time. And it seems like I've been here for a long time, but it goes by so fast, and you want to make the most of it while you're here. And I think it goes back to where I started, and that is that, you know, life's not about self, but life's about service and service to others. And the longer I live, the more I see that people are either givers or takers, and you want to be with the givers. You want to be with those that really want to give for a greater cause and a greater purpose. And this body in the Senate, it's a very historic body, and one that we need to always cherish and know that people have entrusted us to be here, and we owe it to them to give them our best.
So I take it that you believe that our system of running independently is better than the governor and the lieutenant governor running as a ticket.
Yeah, I firmly believe that. I think that having I think it really gives you a greater degree of balance from the legislative and the executive branch. I firmly believe, we've had wonderful lieutenant governors, and I think of Zell Miller and Speaker Murphy. Those were some historic, fights and historic moments of difference, but oftentimes great public policy came as a result of it. And I think that you always want to work to build consensus, and you don't want to be in a position to constantly be in an adversarial role. You want to work with the governor. You want to work with the speaker, but we also have to understand that there is a executive and legislative responsibility and a judicial responsibility, and we want to make sure that all three branches are working the way they should. And so I think having an independently elected lieutenant governor that's elected statewide does give the Senate a unique position and a unique perspective on how to govern and the way in which we need to move the state forward.
You were in the Senate in 2003. Governor Perdue had been elected first Republican
Right.
in years.
Yes.
Almost a century, maybe more.
Since Reconstruction, right.
Shortly after that, there were some party switchers that gave the Republican Party the majority.
I remember.
Was there turmoil?
Not really. I think that it was an interesting process, because you're right. Sonny Perdue, who was just elected governor, was also a state senator, and he was majority leader, and then was president pro tem of the Senate. His relationships were very deep in the Senate, and those friendships that he had were very, very lasting. Hugh Gillis is a prime example. Don Cheeks, Jack Hill from Hinesville and Statesboro, and Sonny roomed together. And so it was not a surprise that those individuals were going to switch parties and give a majority to the governor in the state Senate. And the truth is that philosophically, there was really no difference. Those were some of the most conservative individuals that I know. And so it was only fitting for them to be a Republican and be a part of history in the making.
Mm-hmm. There was an opportunity there, though, for the Republican Party to take advantage of a clear mandate that was given when Perdue won, and the Senate became a majority Republican.
Right.
And I think that played a major role in the development of the Republican Party in Georgia.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that it brought real relevance to the party itself, because the party up to that point, at least in Georgia, had been held in the minority, and so there was history in the making, and it was the chance for Republicans to demonstrate that they could lead. And oftentimes I tell people, it's easy being in the minority. It's easy being in the minority, because in the minority, all you do is throw bombs from the sidelines, okay? You don't get to play in the game. You don't have to pull the wagon, right? You just get to criticize. When you're in the majority, you have to govern. You have to make tough decisions. People are depending upon you of doing your job. And so I think the Republicans, it was very difficult for many, new ones particularly, to understand that you no longer get to throw bombs from the sidelines. You have to govern. You have to really take ownership in what's going on. And I think that Governor Perdue helped in that transition, not only giving the majority, but also changing the mindset of individuals that you now have the ball and we got to score touchdowns and we've got to win for the people of Georgia.
Well, some lieutenant governors use the office as a stepping stone to the governor's office.
Mm-hmm.
Marvin Griffin did it. Ernest Vandiver did it.
Mm-hmm.
Zell Miller did it.
Yeah.
Did you ever have that in mind?
Well, I actually, the truth is, when I ran for lieutenant governor, it was not with the sole purpose of I'm going to be the governor of the state of Georgia. Now, I don't want to say that I don't want to be governor. Obviously, I had intentions of running and did, and obviously had to get out of the race because of a neck surgery that I had to have. Very, very difficult decision that I had to make, and one that I struggled with and anguished with because I was the front runner in the race. I mean, had a huge lead in every poll that was made, taken, and had a significant advantage on the fundraising side. And so to walk away from that was a hard thing. Mm-hmm. But for me, it has never been about ambition. It's never, and that's what sometimes I think people don't understand. It's really about service. And when a doctor comes to you and he says, you need to make a decision if you want to have the use of your left arm, or if you want to risk that. And when that happens, I think it makes us really pause and remember the purpose and the reason that we're fighting. Mm-hmm. And it's not about prestige, it's not about a title, it's about something much greater. And health is important. And so for me, I said, I'm going to do what it takes to make sure that I'm the strongest and the healthiest that I can be. Mm-hmm. Because if I do that, I'll be not only a better public servant, but I'll be a better husband and a better father to my kids. And that's exactly what I did. And so we chose to step back out of that race and stay as lieutenant governor. And obviously, the rest has been history.
Yeah, well, you won that second term.
Yes.
Very easily. Looking back over your career as lieutenant governor, what have you enjoyed most?
Oh boy, there are a lot. There are so many things about this job that I love. Now there are some things that are not always that pleasant, but the things that I love the most is the people. Is getting out in this state and traveling it and getting to see the faces of the people that we have the opportunity to try to make a difference for. And, we do a lot of things. I started the Lieutenant Governor's Healthy Kids Challenge to fight childhood obesity. And, we've been able to raise a lot of money to help. And I've had fathers to come in my office and the kids that have cancer and say, thanks for fighting for the kids. Those are the things that really do make the difference and make you realize that all the long hours, that all the travel, all the difficulty that comes along with this process, there's a reason for it, and the reason is those little ones, those people that you're going to be able to make their lives just a little bit better.
Some Georgians, the governor, are losing faith in their public officials because what they feel is unethical conduct.
Yeah.
Should that be a major concern?
I think that what I would tell you is that from my perspective, I've seen those elected officials, and we can name those that have been indicted that are in prison because they didn't know where the line was, or if they did know, they didn't care, and that's wrong, and they need to pay a price for that. But I don't think that you can use a broad brush to say that all elected officials are corrupt and are on the take and are all about themselves, because there are good people that make phenomenal sacrifices to serve as an elected official. And it's tough. The scrutiny that you're under today, because of all the media outlets and the internet with blogs and so on and so forth, it's a different environment than when I started back in 1994. And so much of that's been positive, but it's the scrutiny that individuals have to go under today is far, far greater. And I think that in many cases that can be positive. But on the same token, I think you have some of the media that doesn't always want to report on what's going on at the legislature in a positive light. It's all about what can we, turn into a tabloid, and I think there's been a weakening of the real press that we used to really admire and respect that doesn't always exist today.
We have a new bill recently signed by the governor.
Mm.
Did that strengthen our ethics laws?
I think it brought more accountability to the process, and I think that when you have standards that everyone understands on the front end, that this is the line, you cannot go beyond, that you will get better results. And so because of that, I think it's very positive, and those boundaries are set for a reason. And hopefully it will send a very strong message to everyone. The issue is that if you get good people to run for office that have been successful in the past, then the glamour and the glitz and the big lights won't cause them to go astray. And we've seen individuals that all of a sudden have risen to power and influence, and all of a sudden they change. The person no longer is the same person that you know of. And you wonder how that happens, but the thing that you can't have, and I tell every freshman legislator that comes in, don't drink the wine, don't drink the Kool-Aid, don't get caught up in this, because you're only here for a short period of time, and it's temporal. And make the most of it. Be focused on really what your goals and what the achievements you want to make, and what your constituents, what your people back home want, and not let all of the lobbyists and all the other things get in the way of the real purpose for the reason you're here. So ethics, if people are ethical themselves, then you don't need a law, okay? I mean, they'll govern themselves.
Right.
But for others, and particularly for the media, I think they wanted something that was a little clearer in law.
Let's talk about money in politics.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the candidate with the most money usually wins.
Maybe I'm the exception to that. When I first ran in 1994, I couldn't raise any money. I had to get all my buddies together and get some of my poultry connections to donate some chicken. We barbecue them up and sell plates for $5 a piece, to raise enough money to put an ad in the newspaper or do a direct mail piece. And we were outspent by a pretty large margin, and we were successful in winning. In our lieutenant governor's campaign, it was the same way. And even Governor Sonny Perdue against Roy Barnes, the then governor, was outspent by a huge margin. So it's not always the people of Georgia, our constituencies, are far smarter than I think a lot of people want to give them credit. And usually you can see through an imposter. You can see through people to know who they really are. And I I still have a lot more confidence, I think, in our voters than some. But money is unfortunately one of those issues that if you don't have it and you can't get your message out, it puts you at a huge disadvantage. So you do have to be competitive, and it is a part of this process.
Let's get back for a minute to Casey Cagle. There will be an opening in the United States Senate next year. Mm-hmm. Seat currently held by Saxe Chambliss.
Right.
You interested?
No. We've already crossed that bridge, and we had a lot of calls from people that wanted me to consider a run for the United States Senate, and it's a very appealing proposition. I mean, being a United States Senator is an opportunity really of a lifetime for many individuals. And I looked at it, I'll be honest with you. We took the time to think through it, and I did with my wife and my boys and my family, and I never could get comfortable. Okay, I just never could get comfortable with living in Washington and commuting back and forth and being a part of that and being in the middle of the gridlock that exists in Washington. And and then I look back here as Lieutenant Governor and all the good things that we have been able to do and the things that we want to do going forward. There just was no contest, and so we decided to pass on it. And there's a lot of people that obviously are interested in it in the middle of it now.
What's on your political front burner?
I've always had a very simple, a simple thought, and when it comes to politics and my future. If you do a good job, you never have to worry about the future. If you just do a good job. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, I think people are too focused on what is politically expedient. Okay, what can I take advantage of politically right now? And that's what motivates every move they make on the chessboard. That's a bad position to be in. You want to just do a good job and do the thing. The people elect me as Lieutenant Governor to make a difference, and I need to be doing that. And I think if I do a good job at it, I don't have to worry about what my next move is going to be. And I really do believe that very strongly. And I think that in the end, that the good Lord above is the one that really does control our paths, and particularly if we allow Him to. And faith is important to me, and it's important to the decisions in which I make. And I believe that doors open for a reason, and when the doors open and you know that it's the door that you need to walk through, then you do it. And that's been my philosophy thus far, and it's panned out pretty well so far.
Going back to your first year
Yeah.
in public office, which was 1995.
Right.
What do you consider your biggest accomplishment?
Wow, the biggest accomplishment. That is Bob, a really good question, and there are a lot of things that I'm thinking through in my mind, but I think learning the process. Now, yes, we were able to be successful in passing legislation, but that wasn't what took precedent. It's understanding what really makes this legislative body unique and special, and being able to really learn from people, and allowing them to be a mentor and instill in me the value system and the respect that this august body has. I think those are the things that I cherish. I mean, because many of those people are gone now. I mean, most all of them are. There are very few that are left when I first came in. And they were wonderful people, and they had enormous experience that they imparted upon me. And now looking back, it was my job to be in a position to impart that same knowledge base to others. And so I think those are the things that you value and appreciate, and you learn the process.
Your biggest disappointment?
I think my biggest disappointment is that maybe sometimes I didn't listen enough. And I think that I'm a pretty hard charging kind of guy, and I burn the candles at both ends. And I like to get things done, and I like to move right now, and sometimes that busyness, I think, can get in the way, and get in the way of really listening enough to people and understanding. And I'm going to give you an example, and this was a great life lesson for me. I had a call when I was first elected to the state senate, and it was a constituent of mine. And she called and she told me, she said, my neighbor has sprayed some kind of pesticide on their yard and is making my cat sick. And it was late at night. And I'm thinking to myself, is this what I'm going to have to deal with? And I caught myself for a split second. And I said, how selfish of you, Casey Cagle, to be thinking this lady's taking up your time, okay? That cat and that pesticide that's making that cat sick is the most important thing in her life right now. And it should be the most important thing in my life because I represent this lady. And it was a moment of getting away from the busyness and really understanding the true fact and the true purpose and meaning behind what we do. And having an opportunity to help someone in time of need is what you're ultimately about as a public servant. And so I think I always have to remind myself to just stop for a moment and get rid of the busyness and recognize the importance and invest in people, invest in what's important to them.
Before we go, please introduce us to your family.
Oh, I'd love to. My wife, who actually is my high school sweetheart, we met in high school, went through middle school and high school together, but football coach of mine set us up on a blind date, and we ended up going out, and it wasn't much of a blind date, but he's the one that set us up, and the rest is history. She's a wonderful lady, and the mother of my three boys, Jared, Grant, and Carter. And as we speak today, they're 24, 21, and 17. They're all 3 years apart. The two older ones are golfers, played collegiate golf. One's already finished with a master's degree and is an assistant golf coach here at Georgia State, and the other one plays collegiate golf at Georgia State. And then the other one's a senior at high school and playing basketball. So he kind of branched away from golf and decided to play basketball, and he'll probably end up having a good collegiate career in basketball. So I've been very, very blessed to have a wonderful family. And, I think that God knew what he was doing when he blessed me with three wonderful boys. And one of the greatest joys of my life is being a father for them. Mm-hmm.
Well, as always, I want to give you, our guest, the opportunity to add or subtract to anything we've said or haven't said before we close out.
Well, Bob, I don't know that I can subtract anything. I think the only thing that I would end on is that Georgia's a wonderful place. I mean, it's when you think of all the beauty and the splendor and the uniqueness that we have as a state, and we're blessed. I mean, we're just blessed beyond measure to have such a great and robust state that's so diverse, and we are the capital of the South. And that didn't happen by accident. it just didn't happen by accident. Zell Miller had the great, quote that's been legendary in many respects when he said, "If you see a turtle on a fence post, you know that turtle didn't get there by itself. Somebody put him there." And it's a great responsibility, but it's a great honor to be in a position to make this state even better. And I think of people like Zell Miller, who said, "I'm going to turn this sleepy little port down in Savannah into a huge economic engine for this state." And he said, "I got a simple little vision, and it is, I'm going to go out and I'm going to recruit the big box retailers to locate in Savannah, Georgia." He said, "Because if those big box retailers will put their distribution centers in Savannah, those ships will have no choice but to come to our seaport." And today, it's the fastest growing port in the nation. And you look in the 70s, I mean, Birmingham and Atlanta were virtually the same size in population. But at that point and at that time, Atlanta took on the biggest investment of its day, $500 million in a place called Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson Airport. Now the busiest airport in the world. Look at Atlanta and look at Birmingham. There's no comparison. We have the unique opportunity to do the same for generations to come. That's the reason that we do the job that we do. And so that's the reason that I'm so committed to investing in education, because education is what is the foundation to build an economy with. If you want to attract great industry and great employers, you give them a great quality workforce. And if we're going to turn out and continue to be the beacon of the South and really of the world, those are the building blocks that you work on. So, you remember the past, but you're always focused on the future, and you draw an enormous amount of strength on those great pioneers and those great leaders that have come before us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Appreciate you. On behalf of the Russell Library and Young Harris College, I'd like to thank you very much.
Well, thank you.